I had some blood in my stool years prior, and I had went to my doctor, and my doctor had told me, "You're too young for colon cancer." Leading right up to the diagnosis, um, probably last couple of years before I was diagnosed, I struggled with constipation a lot, but I just was constantly thinking, "Oh, I just need to put more fiber in my diet, eat less red meat," which I didn't even eat a lot of red meat, but if I did, I would blame that. That would be my reasoning for my constipation. Um, so constipation and bloating. Um, about 6 to 8 weeks prior to my diagnosis, I had some very severe abdominal cramping with some severe constipation. Um, but it subsided. So I just kind of went on about my life. And I had a big move from a different state to Texas. And so I had been in Texas for approximately 2 weeks when I started having severe abdominal pain for about 3 days. And where I could hardly eat. And it was just, I was putting like a warm, you know, compress on my belly. And that's finally what eventually led me to go to the emergency room. I drug myself to the emergency room. And luckily that night there was nobody in the waiting room. So they took me right back. And by this point, I was severely sick. I was starting to throw up, which that is not my normal. When I get sick, I'm not a throw up person. So I knew that something was wrong. But I just thought that I had a blockage. I thought that I was severely constipated. So thank goodness the doctor that was at the hospital that night, she said, "You know what? I'm going to send you in for a CT scan because your stomach is pretty distended." And she was saying, "I normally wouldn't do that because, just for constipation, but, I just feel like we need to do that. Have you ever had a CT scan before?" And I was like, "No, never." And so they sent me in for a CT scan and I waited. A different doctor came in and asked me, "Do you know why you have a blockage?" And, of course, I was like, "Oh, well, I just moved here and I've been eating fast food a lot because I've been traveling and just trying to get, all my furniture put away and, just haven't really been taking care of myself. So I must be just severely constipated." And he kind of sat there and looked at me for a minute. I'll never forget this. And he said, I hate, this is the part of my job that I don't like to talk about. So I'm thinking, oh, they're going to have to take me in for surgery. And he's paused again. He said, "You have colon cancer." And I just remember the room just completely going like a funnel, and just the nurse was next to him. And then it was just like darkness in the whole room. And I don't remember saying very much. I just remember asking them if they could give me a moment and, you know, by myself. And when they left the room, I completely broke down and, bawling tears because here I am in a state all by myself. I know no one. I had just moved, cross country. So I was completely alone. They admitted me that that evening because my colon was so distended they thought that it was going to burst. So they told me it was about 9 centimeters. Um, I saw on the X-ray, and I remember asking the nurse, "What is that?" And she's like, "That is your colon, and it's blocking everything. We can't even see hardly anything else because it's just taking up so much room in there." So I was absolutely shocked, of course. So the next morning they took me into surgery, and the doctor came in to talk to me. And at that time, my dad had arrived from a different state. And so he was with me. And the doctor said, "Normally I would go in laparoscopically and do this procedure, cut the cancer out and be done with it." He said, "But because your colon is so enlarged, I'm going to have to cut you completely open, from belly button to down to the top of your pelvis, and I'm going to have to give you a temporary colostomy bag." And I remember sitting there thinking, no, this is not happening. And I looked at him and I said, no, I'm not doing that. And I remember my dad was like looking at me like, are you serious? Like, what? And I'm like, no, you're not cutting me open and I'm not getting a colostomy bag. Like, I was just so in denial. And I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh, this is like, my life is over. Like, I mean, I literally was thinking, I don't know what was worse actually, like hearing that I had cancer or hearing that I was going to get a colostomy bag. Like, that was just, both of them like back to back. And so the doctor looked at me and he said, well, you have two choices. You can either, let me do this procedure or you're going to die. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, let's go ahead and get this done. you know? So that's when it kind of really hit me like, wow, I need to, like get myself together here and let them do what they need to do. So yeah. So then I went into surgery the next morning. It was determined at that time that I was stage 2. Because of the stage of my cancer at that time, I was in a very gray area, according to my oncologist. So they kind of left it up, they left the choice up to me whether I wanted to do chemo or not. And so I weighed my options and, just made a decision. And that's kind of the thing with cancer. There's a lot of times there's not a right or wrong answer. You just kind of go and you go with the best decision with the information that you have. So I opted not to do chemo at that time and um, was in remission for approximately a year. So during that year, during that time, I actually got my colostomy bag, what they call a takedown. So I got that reversed, and that was like about 6 or 7 months in. And then after that, I did my yearly. I was doing blood work every 3 months, and then I did a yearly scan, and I didn't get my results back. Until like the next year. So I did my scan, I think it was in like November of 2021. And I didn't get my results back until the beginning of the following year. Unfortunately, my doctor left and nobody read my scan. And so when I went to another follow up appointment, the nurse came in and she said, has anybody talked to you about your scan? And I was, so you're so new in all this, you don't know what to ask or how to advocate for yourself. At that time, I didn't know. And so I said, no, I just figured no news was good news. And she's like, well, actually, there's a couple of spots that we see on your liver, and we're pretty sure that that's, cancer. We're going to biopsy, do a PET scan and all that. So at that point, then, obviously I found out that it had metastasized to my liver and was, deemed stage 4 at that point. I mean, at that point, I thought I was going to die. I mean, I truly thought that I'm going to die, and I'll just try to live as long as I can, and um, just enjoy my children and make the best of it. Um, it's like you were saying, so many things I probably would have done differently, or questions I would have asked, or research I would have done differently. Um, so let's see. So yeah, basically, yeah, I thought I was going to die, and so I was trying to process all that, and I'm just thinking, I was just thinking about like getting my affairs in order, like, okay, what do I need to do, this and that. I mean, you know, obviously later on, I found out that they could remove that cancer. I was eligible for surgery and was a good candidate. So I had the liver resection surgery, and that went well and everything. I did one round of chemo a few weeks after the surgery, and then I started like seeing like there was like a lump on my side, like where my liver's at, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, long story short, I ended up getting an infection in my liver. I don't know if it's something that got in there during surgery, but I started having like abscesses busting out of my incisions. There was infection on my actually on my liver. Um, I was so sick for about 6 months. Um, that's probably when I really thought that I was going to die. Not from cancer. I thought I was going to die from this liver infection. They couldn't figure out what antibiotic. I was on every antibiotic, you know, ever invented, I think, IV antibiotics. I was feverish. I had joint swelling, joint pain, bruising on my joints, night sweats like I have never, ever experienced, where I would wake up just saturated, like sopping wet, fever every day. Um, just I mean, I look like a skeleton, but that was very, very rough. That was probably worse than anything, anything. The one round of chemo was bad enough. Actually, that was horrific. I can't imagine having to do 12. I had some blood in my stool years prior, and I had went to my doctor, and my doctor had told me, "You're too young for colon cancer." And at that time, I was in my early 40s, and he said, "Oh, you're too young for colon cancer, so it's just a hemorrhoid or something." And so, I blew that off, and so I wish that I would have pushed and said, "No, let's look into this more. Let's let's do a colonoscopy, whatever. Like let's try to look into this more." Because my blood work was always good. There was never any like huge like you know things that things that would maybe make you think that something was wrong by my blood work. So I wish that I would have advocated for myself more then. Um, just researching a little bit more on things. You actually carry some guilt, which is strange to say. Sometimes I feel guilty, like when I see other people going through, um, their cancer journey, and or people that don't make it, and I feel a lot of times I feel like guilty, like especially if it's like younger people. That's really hard for me to look at, and to hear about a story of somebody young that hasn't survived. So there's a little bit of guilt, but there's always that lingering kind of dark cloud that follows you around, even in your happy moments. There's always, everybody says, well, if you stay positive and you think positive, you have all these positive thoughts, cancer won't come back. Well, I had lots of positive thoughts and cancer came back. So I try to stay positive, but you still have that lingering, just dread of every time you go to get a scan, every time you go to get blood work. You're just, it's like torture waiting for results. Cause you're just it's almost like you're just waiting for the sky to fall. Um, I struggle sometimes not knowing how to break free from that. But I think it's just something that goes along with cancer. It's what it does to your mind. Um, but otherwise, like, I feel great. I'm doing very well right now, and life is good. Not being able to see my children, not being able to experience grandchildren. I have two adult children and one that is still a teenager, and not being able to be there for them, not being able to, just making sure that I've taught them all that they need, to survive in this world, and to make it in this world. And, you know, just the fear of me not being there to be able to protect them, and, not being able to see them do all the things that, you're supposed to see. I have learned, uh, like I was saying earlier, there's things that just don't bother me anymore. Um, like things that, maybe I would have gotten upset about, or I would have just something that would have bothered me. Like I just, you know what, there's bigger things to worry about. Just experiences in life. Like I'm way more excited about things, about doing stuff, even little things. But I am very um driven to go experience new things that I've never experienced before. That drive is just like, it almost keeps me up at night sometimes, just thinking about like all the things I want to do in life and all the stuff I want to try to like accomplish or see, or the places I've never been that I want to go to, and just all that little stuff, or just the beauty in the world, especially nature, because I love to hike and I love the mountains and rivers and creeks and lakes, and I just love being out in that and just the beauty of the world. You have a different appreciation for those things, and I think you see things differently when you're faced with, um, an illness. You just look at life differently. You look at people differently. You look at, relationships differently. It just everything takes on a different meaning. Don't give up. Keep fighting, because this can, it can it things can you can beat this. You have to get yourself outside even when you don't feel like it. You have to get your body moving even when you don't feel like it. Nutrition is huge. Making sure that you're getting the right foods in your body. Your body is an amazing, amazing machine. And you would be amazed at what you can do with your body and how you can help your body to heal. So to not give up, I know that it's hard, and there's times that you get, that you feel very depressed and very down. Make sure you're talking to somebody, or like I said, if you have nobody to talk to, go sit out in the sunshine if you can, because the sun is a wonderful, ground yourself, go walk in the grass barefoot. I mean, just, these things, there's a reason that these things are here, for us, and we need to use them.